If you got a phone call right now from Lego saying, hey, we're doing a Bionicle G3 and we want you to help us work on this project, what would you want? What would be your, you cannot compromise on these, three things or whatever it is, right? For me, and this is just me, I know I'm probably in the minority when I say some of this, but for me, probably my main thing is functions. Not because I think functions are necessary for play, but because functions are a learning moment, a teaching moment. I've always described them like that in past videos. In my own builds, many of the Rahi I've designed, maybe 50%, give or take, have functions of some kind. Sometimes simple, but sometimes complex. And that's partially because I have a lot of joy and fun designing those functions, but also when other people go out of their way to build these models, I love hearing from them and hearing how like a function that they built of mine kind of blew their mind. It was like, wow, that's such a simple approach to this thing, and I never thought about it before. I love that kind of stuff, right? So for me, functions are by far number one, but I know they're not always everybody's cup of tea, nor are they, something somebody can't give up. I could definitely say that if there was a Bionicle G3 announced today, if it didn't have functionality to it, like I'd still be hyped. There's no getting around that. I think I would still be sort of hesitant at the very least until seeing the figures and how they look, right? But overall, I'd be a little let down if there weren't functions, but it wouldn't be the end of the world for me. However, again, this is my list, right? Functions are something that for me is not a compromise. Next, I think character development, character depth, relatable characters too. I felt like that was one of the strengths of early Bionicle, especially, is that the characters felt a lot more relatable. Later Bionicle, there was obviously a lot more like plot points where things kind of fell in place for characters, or characters were like feeling kind of overpowered in certain scenarios that felt a little less relatable, or sometimes would have like conflicting story beats, let's say, right? And characters evolve through story, so like that's not impossible by any means. But those earlier Bionicles had a lot more internal conflict, it felt like, at least, that were more evident on the page, partially because, internal conflict is what kind of had to drive some of those early years of Bionicle. There weren't as many villains yet, right? And how do you make a Rahi a true villain that you can relate to? It's an animal, right? That said, though, I do think that Bionicle still is very strong in its essence in creating characters that you can relate to. That's something that Lego has done well in the past. So that's definitely up there for me. I don't think it necessarily even needs to be the same characters we knew before. A completely new team of characters I'd be totally fine with. Of course, I'd want it to still take place in the Bionicle universe we all knew and loved in the past, but it would be cool to see. And then third, what would my third thing be for Bionicle? I really would like it to be, so I like, obviously, a return to a sort of Gen 1 type of building system. I don't think it's strictly necessary. A CCBS-like system or SCCBS would not be impossible for me to get behind, but I'm more hesitant towards those, especially SCCBS, given what else is already on the market currently. Though that's not always a bad thing, because if Bionicle came out as SCCBS today, but with maybe more specialized parts, then you still have part compatibility with other SCCBS type lines, if that makes sense, or themes from Lego. And that's not a bad thing, not necessarily. Outside of that, though, I myself would want something that's a lot more focused on the sort of Technic, stylized Technic. I don't know what else to call it, right? Because it's not really like true Technic in a sense, because many of the parts are very specialized in their design. The Anika body is not a pure and total Technic brick. It has, details and greebling and stuff on it. And I love that, obviously. It adds detail to your characters, it adds detail to your builds, and sometimes you can do really fun stuff with those details, with those elements, like adding clips to certain things that just coincidentally happen to be bar-sized or whatever. Anyway, so I do think my own preference would be a G1 style of building system. I'd be greedy in the sense that I'd want it to be a little more classic in style, which is a little more blocky in its shapes, mostly. But, that's just me, right? So those are sort of my main gripes, my main asks when it comes to Lego. functions. Combination models would always be good, but of course you got to take into account like the fragility of sets and the time it takes to like actually develop sets, because obviously combination models take extra development time. But anyway, I don't think it's too much to ask, but I do think that it is a different atmosphere. It's 2024. It's not 2001 anymore. And it's hard to really think about that. I was thinking the other day about like how other toys and bits of media impacted my life growing up, because Bionicle was such a huge part of my childhood, but there was other stuff there, right? I lived in the era that Pokemon came out in. I was young, but I was there at least, right? Where Yu-Gi-Oh was a thing, where Magic the Gathering was a thing. I didn't play as much of that stuff as a kid. It was all Pokemon for me way back then. Playing with like Hot Wheels and stuff. I'm probably, I don't know, 7, 8 years old or something. And I love that stuff. And I love mixing them too, mixing these worlds. And I think that's one of the strengths of a world where Bionicle exists with all of these other massive franchises. It's competition for companies, but for kids, it's a blessing, right? When you've got all these companies trying to put out like top tier content, Pokemon was great and still is, and obviously still has a very loyal fan base even to this day. The same holds true with Bionicle. The same holds true with, there are adults that still collect like Hot Wheels and things like that. So it's like, I get it. And I really did grow up in a good time, I think, to be a kid. But, a lot of it's overshadowed just by the sheer amount of time and attention that Bionicle took from all those other sets. I don't know where I would be today if Bionicle wasn't a part of my life. I can't imagine my life would be that much different, but this wouldn't be behind me, right? If we lived in a world where Bionicle didn't exist, I don't know what that would look like. All right, so that's going to be it for this one. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. It helps the channel out, especially with all the stuff going on. And of course, you can also check out the links for Discord, Instagram, and Patreon down in the description below. Remember, with Patreon too, $1, $3, and $5 tiers, all of that helps me out tremendously. You really have no idea. And also, right now, it's going into AliExpress or, for knockoffs. So I can do some reviews for the channel here. So very happy to have some of that stuff coming in. I've got some very small things coming here. And I think I should have one set that's arriving tomorrow, but we'll see. Holiday weekend. And I do want to grab a turntable as soon as possible on there so I can have some sets that can rotate. That would be fun. All right, that's it. Take care.